And we are live. Thank you very much for joining Balling Out. Gentlemen, DZ, Matt, JJ, this is a shorter session due to the fact that the NBA is currently in a state of hiatus with the off-season. Not too much has happened since the last time we spoke, so a shorter session than usual should be expected. Gentlemen, the two things I wanted to talk about today were which teams do you think have had the best NBA off-season and which teams have had the worst? And I'd like you to talk me through why you think those teams have had a good one and why the teams that you think haven't had a good off season. So, DZ, can you start with which team you think's had the best off season and why?
All right. I'm gonna go with the LA Clippers. I think they've had the best offseason because purely, I think by adding John Wall, they've given themselves extra depth at the guard position. And Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are both look pretty good in terms of like their physical condition, and they're both going to be ready to go. And I think those two being added to that team, it's going to be like the Warriors getting back Klay Thompson and a healthy Steph Curry. Like it's going to just elevate them all the way to the top in terms of like with the West. So I think simply by standing pat adding one little piece and by getting back to one guy is an all NBA player, Kawhi Leonard, probably a top 5, top 10 player when healthy. By getting him back, I think it's going to basically make them a different team next season. Plus a healthy Paul George as well to a team that deep. To add John Wall there as well, coming off the bench and fighting for minutes from the guard position, I think it's going to really help them. So I had the Clippers as having the best off season, and then number two is going to be a bit of a people might not see this coming. I had the Brooklyn Nets as having the second best off season, purely because Kevin Durant's a top 3 player, generational player, and by retaining him alone, it keeps them as a title contender. And by they've added pieces around the team as well. They recently added Markieff Morris and they've added a few other players as well, who are going to make them better. And I think by getting Ben Simmons healthy, he should be healthy for next season. Kyrie said he's committed and he's locked in, and there's no vaccine mandate as well for next year. So I think by retaining the top 3 guy in KD in his prime, adding on all the pieces, Kyrie motivated, available to play, Ben Simmons available to play, hopefully demon free. Then I think for me, those are the best 2 teams in terms of like who are going to be much better than they were last season. In terms of that's how I kind of looked at it, like how better were you? I mean, how good were you at the end of like at the start of the summer, and how are you now basically? And at the start of the summer, it looked like Kyrie was going to get traded for Russell Westbrook, and KD wanted out. So by retaining those guys, they're much better than they would have been without those guys, and same for the Clippers. So that's why.
Interesting. And what chances do you give the Nets in the East in terms of what your expectations are in terms of how they progress to the finals or to win in general? Where do you put them in the
I think
pantheon?
they're a top 3 or 4 team. So I don't expect them to come out the East. I expect that to be Milwaukee, but I think they're in amongst that top 4 group of 4 teams that if they came out the East, it wouldn't be a shock. And if they made the Eastern Finals, it wouldn't be a shock either.
So you put the Nets in the same bracket as the Bucks, the Celtics, and what you got the Sixers as your other
No,
team.
I've got the Bucks and Celtics on a higher tier, but then I put the Nets in the tier just below them.
Okay.
In terms of like alongside Philly, in terms of teams that I expect to challenge to at least make the East Finals. And if they did make the finals, it wouldn't be a shock if they came out of it. So
And how about the Clippers? Where do you see they sit within the sort of
I think
stratosphere of the West?
I think they're gonna come out the West.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You think Kawhi and George are going to stay healthy this year?
I think they will. I remember the year in Toronto when Kawhi just kind of paced himself. And even when up until he got hurt last year against the Utah Jazz, he looked really good. The numbers he was putting up on both sides were phenomenal, like 33 points, really high shooting percentage. He was balling out. And I think the Clippers have a chance to develop without him, kind of like the Warriors. So when Clay went down, it allowed Jordan Poole and rest guys to get more minutes, and it made them better players when Clay kind of got back. So I think it'll be the same thing with the Clippers in terms of like with Reggie and some of the other guys who they have on the team. By giving them minutes and exposure in the playoffs, I think it's going to help them when Kawhi gets back and Paul George. And I think all of this only works if all the guys are healthy, by the way. As we know in the NBA, health is king. And if everyone is healthy in the West, I expect the Clippers to walk out.
Okay, fair enough. Matt, what do you think from your perspective? Which teams do you think had the best off season in the NBA this year and why?
Yep, so my main 2 come from the East. I think the first one is the 76ers. I think just mainly because of the fact that they were able to retain the kind of core five that they had last year in Embiid, Harden, Tobias Harris. I can't remember what the rookie's name. The rookie's name is
Maxi,
left me. Maxi, Tyrese Maxi, and but yeah, just the fact that they were able to retain their core.
PJ Tucker as well. They
Plus,
added him.
yeah, plus add PJ Tucker and Daniel House. PJ Tucker obviously was part of the Bucks 2021 finals winning team, so he's shown in recent history that he can play a part in a team that is capable of winning. It gives them that defensive intensity on the perimeter as well. Daniel House, who's also played with Harden before in Houston, can give them a bit of free and D as well, maybe a bit more isolation scoring off the bench. And obviously, they've just recently added Montrezl Harrell, I think yesterday or a few days ago. And he was Sixth Man of the Year not too long ago, who, although is undersized at the power forward position, can still provide valuable minutes and scoring off the bench. So I think the 76ers have had a brilliant offseason. I expect them, with what they've managed to acquire, I expect them to make at least a deep run. I'd say, just because the Bucks and the Celtics are still in the East, I'd say make at least the semifinals again. But this time, if they were to meet, for instance, the Celtics in the semifinals, I think that could potentially be a toss-up series. I think if they play as well as they can, they could possibly beat the Celtics in a 7-game series. So, yeah, I think the 76ers have had a great offseason. And then also the Celtics as well. Once again, they've been able to retain the core that made it to the NBA Finals. And they've also added Malcolm Brogdon, who's a very capable defender, a good three-point shooter, is also part of the 50-40-90 club. So that's shot 50% from the field, 40% from three, and 90% from the free throw line, and can also take point guard responsibilities when needed. So they acquired him without giving up anything, and I think he strengthens the team that already made the finals. So yeah, Celtics and the 76ers for me.
Matt, thanks for that. And DZ, Matt, I find it fascinating that DZ, you chose the Nets and you chose the Clippers, neither of which added any noticeable major free agents. I mean, the Nets picked up Royce O'Neal and the Clippers picked up John Wall. And Matt, you went for the Celtics and the 76ers. The 76ers best player I'd say they picked up was PJ Tucker, arguably, who's, I don't know, 35, 36. Probably just a little bit younger than me and DZ out here. And then you've got the Celtics, who picked up Malcolm Brogdon, who I agree is a very strong and solid player, but typically is injury prone over the last few years. So I'm getting a sense from you two that you're less enamored by the flashy free agents and more with the teams that have managed to retain their core, that have kept what was solid last year and just added around the edges to improve that. That's a general theme I'm sensing from you two. I was expecting more focus on the teams that picked up the new free agents, such as Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. So that's very surprising from my end. I mean, look, from my perspective, I have to say the Cleveland Cavaliers have easily had the best offseason in the league from my point of view. Last year, they were a very solid defensive team, had some injuries, and then fell off a little bit. This year, they've picked up arguably one of the best offensive guards in the league in Donovan Mitchell, and have a backcourt of Garland and Mitchell in an East, which I would say is devoid of guards, is more big guys and wings. So that's going to give them a massive boost. And I think it takes the Cleveland Cavaliers from a team that's just, playing around the edges to an actual force within the East. It'll be interesting to see how they gel, but that team, I imagine, will do some damage. The other team, I agree with you, Matt. I think the Celtics, they got to the finals last year, and this year they just added additional players. Gallinari's gone down, unfortunately, but Malcolm Brogdon is a very, very solid guard. Back to your point, though, DZ, about the Nets. You mentioned, and you did as well, Matt, before, that you felt like, KD, Kyrie, even Ben Simmons were a little bit unreliable, almost loose cannons. With that in mind, why is it that you now think that the Nets had one of the better off seasons by retaining players who arguably didn't even want to be there? I mean, KD said he didn't want to be there. Kyrie essentially said he wanted to be in LA. And Simmons, for all intents and purposes, left a group chat when asked whether he would join the guys in the playoff game. So what makes you think that now that's going to mean that they're going to have a better off season or a better season this year?
I think, just to add to Matt's point quickly, I think James Harden, by the way, coming back in the best shape he's looked like in like 3-4 years is going to be a massive difference. Because by all accounts, even from his pictures that he's been posting, because I guess he knows he's in shape, he looks like the Harden that looked like that was in Houston before he decided to put the weight on to get traded. So just by Harden being, James Harden.
In shape as a professional athlete.
Just by him, yeah. Just by him, being in shape, I think it's going to make a massive difference. But as for for the Nets, I think for one, there's no vaccine mandate, which I think was massive for the team last year. Because that's why Harden wanted to get traded, and that's why KD just got fed up of it all. Because just said this is ridiculous. The inconsistency is I don't know who I'm playing with, who I'm not playing with. You can't build chemistry with guys who are not there. They traded Harden, and then Ben Simmons couldn't even play because of his back and his mental issues. So I think the fact that Kyrie's basically, it's a career year for him. He knows that he has to ball out because it's going to dictate what type of contract he gets next year moving forward. So I think that's going to motivate him. And he's come out and he said recently that some of the things that I've said to the media might have been a little goofy, which I think is his humble way of saying, I've been a bit of a tool for the last few years, and I get it. And I think the pandemic was a weird time for everybody. I think everybody reacted how they reacted to it, so I think that's his way of just saying that, yeah, it's just been a bit of a weird time. George Floyd and everything else. I think by Kyrie saying, I've been a bit goofy, I think it's his way of saying, yeah, that's my bad. And so I think, yeah, KD, I think he wanted to leave because I think he saw the turmoil. He probably just got tired of it all because they went into this series against the Celtics with no chemistry, with very little defense. It just wasn't very much of a team. Joe Harris missed the whole season. He's coming back. So I think with all those pieces put together, I think the Nets are going to be dangerous. I'm not saying they're going to win it all, but I think they're going to be much better than they were last year. And if they just get to the playoffs with KD healthy and a team around him of guys who can do their jobs, then I think the Nets will have a punch of chance because KD can close. So, yeah. And in the playoffs, it kind of comes down to who's got the best closer. So if the team can just keep it close, then he can close. So, yeah.
So you're banking on KD being great and healthy in the playoffs with a surrounding core that can keep him in the mix.
Again, all of this when he works with guys are healthy, but obviously people got, he's been hurt recently. Kyrie's normally banged up at that time of year. Ben Simmons, like I've said before, he's had a heart issue. See the Wizard of Oz, So yeah, but I think everything, withstanding, I think the Nets will have a serious chance this year.
See, I hear what you're saying from a talent standpoint, and I also understand from a continuity point of view. I just have my concerns that your three best players, one said he didn't want to be there, two said he wanted to be, the other one wanted to be in LA, and three didn't want to play. That scares me. That would worry me from a leadership point of view because that sets the tone for all the other players. It's almost like joining a company and you heard that the CEO wants to leave, the CFO wants to go somewhere else, and the COO ain't got no time for the company. That for me doesn't signify that they've got faith in the direction of the company. And then all of a sudden, if they come back in a couple of months at the AGM and say, "Oh no, we're here, we're ready to make this work," I'm not buying it. But look, we'll see as the season starts. I imagine they'll pick up a lot of wins just on talent. But where I want to see them actually differentiate themselves is in the playoffs, and I think there's a massive absence of leadership there. But we'll see anyway. That's another 9 months away before we get to that point. Matt, anything else you wanted to add to that in terms of the teams that you think have had a good offseason before we move on to the next question?
Real quick, let me just
of course,
yeah. For me, when it comes down to the playoffs, it tends to be who's when it's kind of close talent-wise, it's not really down to who's got the better player. And I think in most series, apart from the Bucks, that guy's going to be playing for the Nets. I'm saying if everyone else just does their jobs basically, then KD is better than most of the guys, and that's why, except for maybe Giannis. So I think that's why. But
and this is why I have an issue. I agree with the philosophy that the best player usually their team will win. Usually, if everyone else does their job, which is the caveat that Ben Simmons has demonstrated is not there.
Yeah,
Kyrie
that's
Irving
true.
has demonstrated is not there.
Yeah,
Joe
that's
Harris
true.
has been injured. TJ Warren
Mm.
just come from a massive foot or knee injury.
Mm.
I tell you what, from what I can see from the Nets, if all goes well, that's a championship team. If things don't work out based on one or two things that fall the wrong way, that team's going to be looking at a very, very, very easy out in the first round. But we'll see. We'll see.
Fair enough. Mm.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I just think the Nets, just personality wise, mentally wise, maybe even emotionally wise, I just think they're too unstable. I think a lot of the sort of intangibles that we've been referring to over the past couple of weeks really kind of state itself when it comes to the Nets. There's just too many flaky characters. I think even banking on KD to kind of live up to his status of being the best player in most series, I think we probably even, it wouldn't be unfair for us to even question if he's going to do that now, considering you would have said that he was the best player in the series heading into the heading into the series with the Boston Celtics, and yet he got outplayed by Jason Tatum, and they got swept 4-0. So I don't know. They're gonna have to prove themselves this season. I wouldn't place any bets on them just because they haven't shown themselves to be reliable in the past.
I mean, look, and to add to that, Matt, if you look at their team on paper, I don't think there's many teams in the league that have as much talent across the board. They've got shooting, they've got ball handling, they've got an amazing array of players from top to bottom. I just get the sense that they're like that friend you've got that's from a good family. He's got a good education, good job. He's got a good wife, but he ends up in rehab every couple of months because he's just making silly mistakes. He just doesn't know what he's doing. But he's got all the tools. He's got everything you would imagine you would need to be successful in life. But he just makes bad choices. And I just feel like the Nets are literally that guy. You put your arm around him, you say, "Bro, come on, man, you got this. You got a beautiful family. You got great kids. Why are you back in rehab again?" But you are what you are. You do what you do, and I think the Nets are going to prove that to us. I hope they don't, because again, I want to see KD, Kyrie, Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Joe Harris. You know, I mean, I want to see those guys lighting it up in the playoffs. I just don't get the sense that they will, but I'm excited to see what will happen. So moving on then from the team with the best, or the teams with the best off seasons, we now move on to the teams which you believe had the worst off season. And I appreciate that there's a few more weeks left before the off season's over. So, you know, we have to take that into consideration. But from what you saw at the beginning of the off season till now, which teams would you say have had the worst off season? I'll start with you, Matt. 1, 2, or 3 teams. You pick as many as you like.
Okay, so this may come as a bit of a surprise, considering that I've not really heard or seen a lot of people kind of downplay or devalue this move. But I actually think the Minnesota Timberwolves had a pretty bad offseason, in my opinion. And I think it's because watching that Memphis Grizzlies series last year, they could have easily won that series. They had, I think in every game, they had at least a double-digit lead by either the third quarter or the fourth quarter. They could have easily won that series. And one of the main kind of things that they did well was their perimeter defense. They were literally kind of hindering Ja what he was able to do. And so the fact that they've traded away all their perimeter defense plus a couple of first-round picks for Rudy Gobert, but not only because it's Rudy Gobert, it's the fact that it's in the West. The West and the East, even though it's basketball, they're not entirely the same. The East is more kind of big man centric, whereas the West is more wing guard centric. And I think for them to kind of trade away all of their perimeter defense in Pat Bev, Beasley, and McDaniels, and get Rudy Gobert in when they already have Cat, albeit he's not a great defender, but when you already have a center like Cat, I don't see the longevity in the move. I don't see how this propels them forward. And for what they gave up, if you're to acquire a player for what they gave up, it needs to be a move that really shift something in the West, and I just don't think it does. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they don't pass the first round again. And so because of that, based on what they gave up, I think it's a pretty bad move. I think they had a bad offseason. Another team that I think had a pretty bad offseason is the Knicks. Not to kind of be a dead horse continually, but acquiring Jalen Brunson, kind of re-signing RJ Barrett. I don't even think the Knicks make the play-in. I just don't think so. I think the East has got stronger over the years, and when I think about teams like the Bulls, who I don't even think may make it past the first round, it's just like, yeah, with the money that they gave to Brunson, they're still not guaranteed a playoff position. So I think they had a pretty bad offseason. But yeah, off the top, those are the main two for me.
Wow, that's interesting. Deezy, you reacted quite viscerally to the Knicks one. Before I ask you some follow-up questions, Matt, Deezy, what are your thoughts on what Matt has just said about the Knicks?
You know they say in Russia, what's they say in Russian? Hope dies lost or something. There's an expression that says, hope dies lost. So in New York, we still have hope. You know, we call it Gotham City for a reason, you know, so we still believe our Batman's going to show up and just swoop down, and that's RJ Barrett. Is going to go from being a 22-point guy to, you know, an all-star. And that you know, Brunson can surprise people and, you know, step out of Lucas' shadow. But, you know, I admit it was rough. Not getting Donovan Mitchell was tough. I'm not going to lie. But hope springs eternal. You know, start of every season, every fan's optimistic. So I still think the Knicks can at least make the play. And that's like top 10 teams. I think the Knicks can get into that club. I'm not saying they'll make it through, but I'm saying that they'll at least be close.
So you're saying that the Knicks
they make it last year?
They'll be close to the play-in?
No, they didn't. No.
So which team falls out?
Who made it last year was the Cavs, right? The Cavs, I think, finished eighth, right?
The Nets. I think it was the Cavs, the Nets, the Hawks, and one more.
See, I don't think the Hawks are going to be as good this year. So,
do you think the Knicks will be better than the Hawks?
I'm just saying. I think that the Knicks could make a bit of a leap, but I don't personally believe in DeJounte Murray as much as everyone else does, and I think he's going to be a bit of addition it's going to be subtraction by addition of him, you know. But I'm not saying that they will do it. I'm saying I wouldn't rule them out, and as a fan, I have to believe. So we'll see.
So you mentioned hope twice and fan at the end. Now I think that just completely disqualifies your objective opinion on on this point about the Knicks. But look, we won't belabor the point on the Knicks because we all.
I think when I mentioned Batman, I mean that should have really just discounted it all, Jermaine. But it's okay.
That was it. That was just
yeah.
We'll let that one go. I should have jumped on that. To be fair.
Yeah.
Matt, you mentioned the Wolves, having a bad offseason for what they gave up. I just want to mention the starting five to you guys and tell me where you think the gaps and the problems are. So at the guard number one spot, they've got D'Angelo Russell, who's arguably borderline fringe all-star, maybe just a very good starting point guard. They've also got Anthony Edwards, 19, 20-year-old, very, very explosive, a player that's up and coming in the league at the moment. At the free guard, they kept Jaden McDaniel. They got rid of, I think it's Vanderbilt was the guy they got rid of, but they kept McDaniel. So they've got McDaniels, they've got Russell, and they've got Anthony, who are very, very strong as a backcourt and a wing support. And then they've got Cat, who is one of the best, actually is the best offensive center or big man in the league, arguably in terms of scoring. Maybe
in terms of shooting, you mean?
In terms of shooting, yeah, maybe not passing and whatnot. But then you've got Rudy Gobert, who's 2 or 3 times Defensive Player of the Year. Now, I'm not suggesting that they are a championship team, but I do feel like with that 5 and then the bench that they've got, they're gonna do some damage in the league this year. They got rid of Pat Bev, who again arguably is a very, very good defensive point guard, but he's 34. He's on an expiring contract this year, so they knew that long-term D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards needed more minutes anyway. They got rid of Beasley, who wasn't working well with the team, good scorer, and Vanderbilt, who is a good defensive player but isn't really effective on the offensive end. So getting rid of picks and players that are not a massive part of your team to upgrade to a point where you can now exploit the backcourt of the future with a front court that is going to be very, very difficult to deal with. I'd ask you the question, do you not see that 5 as a strong enough 5 in the West to contend for a strong playoff space?
Yeah, so thanks for correcting me. Yeah, they kept McDaniels, traded Vanderbilt. Yeah, I think my problem is, and this is kind of linked to the discussion we had regarding Tim Duncan, because if you watched the playoff series between the Mavericks and the Jazz last year, although, you know, like you said, Rudy Gobert is like a 2 or 3-time defensive player of the year. In these playoff games, teams do find a way to almost make him like ineffective. The same way Jalen Brunson and Doncic were just pulling him out and just exposing him out on the perimeter. I don't know. As a defensive player, although he's a very, you know, he's a very good shot blocker and everything, I just don't see where his impact will be felt in the playoffs, even though the team is pretty decent. And I do think as well that with the trade that they pulled off, they are heavily relying on Anthony Edwards to make like a huge ascension into pretty much near superstardom. So, and whether that's going to happen, you can never really put a time scale on these things. So I don't believe in the move, honestly. I would not be surprised if they don't make it past the first round again.
Okay. Look, I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you that Rudy Gobert has been exposed in the playoffs multiple times as a player who is very good on the interior, but on the exterior is no threat. And on offense, again, is no threat. I just feel like the Minnesota Timberwolves were a very good defensive team last year, and now they've added one of the best defenders from a big man perspective in the league. Anthony Edwards is making that ascent. I mean, if you're watching his games, you're seeing this guy is improving leaps and bounds, literally.
I think he's going to be an all-star this season.
So what you're essentially looking at is D'Angelo Russell's been an all-star. Anthony Edwards is progressing to become an all-star. You've got Rudy Gobert and Cat, who are arguably all-stars. So you're looking at, 4 players who are B up to A minus maybe in terms of their ability. Maybe the fit needs to be worked out, but they're young, they're dynamic, they're fast. They've got Taurean Prince as well. As another guard that can shoot, another wing that can shoot. I understand your concerns about Rudy Gobert, but I do think that the areas where they're going to be very strong is in their ability to dominate the paint, offensively and defensively. Because previously, offensively, Cat's been able to dominate, but on defense, they've been lacking on the interior.
I think we lost Jermaine there for a second. I think the internet just said he was waffling, so let's just cut him off. So, to add to your point, I think Anthony Edwards, I think he's going to be, I think he's so talented. And I think he's got Ja Morant in terms of potential. In terms of, only thing is he working on his game right now? Like, is he working on his shooting? I think he's got the athleticism to basically to be as good as he wants to be. And he's so confident as well. He's got so much heart, that kid. And I think if he's working on his shooting and if he can get that right and take that to the next level, then I think his ceiling, it's so high. But once again, it depends because you don't know how much work people are doing or not doing in the off season. Like Ja worked in his shooting the last few years and he really improved it. Like his second year, he flatlined and then he got much better in his third year. So, I mean, it depends on what Anthony Edwards is actually doing this summer and what he's been doing with his game. But yeah, the potential for me with him, it's definitely there. So,
Do you think they also need him to make that ascension defensively as well, considering
absolutely
what they've let go of? But do you see that in him though as a defender?
I think it's early days. It's hard, but I think the tools are there. Like he's kind of got the size ish to impact things in the perimeter, and he's got the speed, he's got the lateral quickness, He's got the explosiveness. I think physically he's got the tools. The only question is defense is about desire, and
Yeah.
does he want to? And only he knows that. So only. I guess we'll find out. That's a good thing. We'll find out. But if I was to suggest, yeah, I think Jermaine's back. Kind of see a bit of a backstage there.
Yeah, a little bit of backstage, guys. Give me 2 minutes. I'll be back
Yeah.
in. Carry on with the conversation.
You get everything on this podcast, but yeah. So I was gonna say, for me personally,
Do you see
Yeah,
them
go on.
making it past the first round?
no, the West is it's shark infested. There's no way. Nor did the Warriors, the Clippers, the Nuggets. No, the West is shark infested. Luka, the Suns, they're not as good as any of those 5 teams. So therefore, they don't make it out of the first round this year. I think this year they'll come and they'll learn about what pieces they need to add in the summer next year. Then I think it'll be the next year. But I wouldn't rule it out completely because they've still got talent. But I don't see them doing it this year.
Do you reckon if both teams are at their peak, do you reckon they're better than the Pelicans?
That's tough because we don't know what Zion's going to look like. Physically, it's tough because we've never seen. I don't know. It's hard to say because we don't know what Zion's going to be next year. So it's hard to say. I would say I'd go 7 games, but they likely wouldn't be because of the seeding. Both teams likely be at the bottom. So I think they'll probably be playing the Warriors or the Clippers or the Suns, and I think it's a short series. It's 5-6 games. It's max 5-6 games. If they play the Clippers, the Warriors, or the Suns, definitely the Clippers or the Warriors. It's 5 games maximum.
Yeah, because I'm quite high on the Pelicans, and when I look at the potential ceiling of the Pelicans, I don't even see with this supposed big move that the Timberwolves just made. I don't even see that for them. Like, I know obviously JJ mentioned that D'Angelo Russell was kind of like fringe all-star, but he can be a bit flaky. His form can go up and down as well. He's not entirely the most reliable player either.
True.
So
True.
That when I look at someone like CJ McCollum, even though CJ hasn't actually been an all-star like D'Angelo, I trust CJ more than a D'Angelo.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely more reliable. And yeah, to give my take on to close out the podcast, to give my take on who kind of made the worst move in the West in the in the NBA, kind of gives it away who I'm going to say when I say the West. It's going to be all purple and gold. The Los Angeles Lakers, showtime. I think by them keeping Russell Westbrook, I think it's going to be detrimental to their team. His shooting last year fell off a cliff. Free throws, 3-point percentage. He's not as athletic as he used to be. And the thing about Russ as well is he's always healthy. So they come and get a break, but him not playing, he's always available. So yeah, I think the fact that the Lakers couldn't move him, I think is going to be detrimental towards the being able to compete. And I think by bringing in Pat Bev, I think eventually those two are going to rub each other the wrong way as well, and it's going to affect their chemistry. So I think it's all smiles and they're having a good time now. There's pictures of me hanging out in practice and whatnot. But I think when the season starts and they're taking minutes from each other, then I think it's going to start to get a bit. It's going to start to get a bit tough. So I think for me it's the Lakers because they've still got that anvil hanging around their necks, and Russ is going to bring them down. So yeah, I think it's the Lakers.
So it looks like I came back at the right time.
You did, and to be honest with you, a part of me is kind of happy about it. I mean, you shouldn't really enjoy these things, but it's like watching a car crash, but in slow motion. So you kind of it's coming. The drivers had a few too many vodkas. The road's slippery because it's been snowing, and it's coming. And yeah, Russell Westbrook is the icy road.
Easy.
And LeBron's the car careening off. Anyway.
Well, for someone that shouldn't enjoy these things, your analogies are pretty vivid.
Just said. But yeah, that's my take on who's had the worst off season. I think for me it's the Lakers.
Okay, so sorry, go on.
No, that's it.
So you mentioned the Lakers in terms of keeping Westbrook. Is there anything that they did on their team that you liked this offseason? Anyone they brought in that you like the look of? Anything about their team setup?
I mean, Pat Bev's going to help.
Yeah.
I think them lowering the age of their team in terms of age-wise is going to help as well. It's going to help them play defense better. Last year, everybody said before that they're just too old to play D. In terms of at that age, like defense is about being able to react first to second movements. And when you get to that stage, like Carmelo Anthony and Westbrook and LeBron, and like they might give you that first phase of D, but then when you have to react a second time, that spring just isn't there anymore. And like so, for me, them lowering the age of their team is going to help because it means they're bringing in younger guys, and the coaches wants to play a lot more energy on defense this year. Like they put like a brand new coach as well, and he's going to help. So he's a former player. He won with Giannis in the Bucks. I think he's going to help their intensity. But I think for me, lowering the age has been important, but keeping Russell Westbrook is it's tough, man.
So you think this is the 10th or the 9th year out of the last 10 where the Lakers don't make the playoffs?
Yeah, no, I mean they might. I think they'll make the play-in, but I don't see them making the playoffs. And if they do get to the playoffs, I don't see them getting more than a game. It'll be a gentleman's sweep.
What do you think about that, Matt, in terms of what the Lakers did this offseason?
Yeah, the reason I didn't put them as one of the worst, as DC mentioned, I like the appointment of the coach who seems to be very defensive minded. I've always found that, especially with LeBron, really an offensive coach isn't always necessary with him, considering his IQ and his ability to just run the floor. So usually, just like with Frank Vogel, who was also a very defensive-minded coach, defensive coaches usually do well with him. So I like that appointment. Also, just like you said as well, reducing the age of the squad. I like the Pat Bev addition. I don't love it, but I do like it just because it gives them a bit more perimeter defense. I'm not actually a big fan of the JTA acquisition just because I don't think Steve Kerr really trusted him in big kind of playoff moments for the Warriors. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see maybe what the Lakers saw in him for the Warriors that made them acquire him. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with him. But in general, I don't think they're done. I think they've still got at least one or two more moves up their sleeve. But mainly because of the coach and the age reduction. Also, I don't think they're re-signing Carmelo, who although is still a capable scorer, not at the level he used to be at, but he is a real defensive liability. So, yeah, not great, but not the worst for me.
Interesting. So it's funny that you guys talk about the Lakers and you mentioned Darvin Ham, you mentioned Pat Bev, you mentioned Russell Westbrook, but you don't mention Anthony Davis and LeBron James. I mean, the last 2 years, those two guys have had injuries. What impact do you think they will have on the Lakers if they can stay relatively healthy for this year, considering they've got Pat Bev, considering they've got Kendrick Nunn, JTA, Lonnie Walker, and a lot of young legs and defensive-minded players? Do you think if they stay healthy, potentially they can make a stronger run?
I mean, Anthony Davis himself came out and he said, even when we played together last year, there was no chemistry. We just didn't play well. Even when we were available, he said it just didn't work as a collective. So I think even when they were together, I think the record wasn't that impressive. It was a short period of time, admittedly. It was a short sample size. And, when you get into all the stuff, Charles Barkley called Anthony Davis street clothes. Someone says AD stands for always dinged. We won't get into any of that. But I think
you just did. You just did. It's like saying no comment, but then you make a comment.
So we won't get it. I mean, obviously, if those guys are available, it's going to make a massive difference. But I just think, for the time, man, like he's undefeated. Like they say that, there's an expression in boxing, it's like you just wake up slow one day, like it happens overnight. And I think if Father Time continue to knock on LeBron in terms of his availability and his injuries, I think it's going to be. I mean, if I just don't see it personally, I think at his age, he can't be the best player on a team at 38. He can't be the most fundamental piece. I think it should be AD because he's in his prime. LeBron should be supplemental at this point of his career, and to be relying on a 38-year-old is going to be unfair. It's just biologically unfair. And so for me personally, I don't see it happening because Anthony Davis has shown throughout his career that he's not available, basically.
Fair enough. Matt, anything else you want to add to the Lakers, or is that?
Yeah, for me, I think this is entirely dependent on AD. I think LeBron has shown that he's still a top 10 player in this league. And when they actually got AD, I remember the talks were that the Lakers now have two of the top 5 players in the NBA. So at the time that they brought him, AD was a top 5 player, which means at his best, he is at the least a top 10 player in the league. If he can somehow reach that level with LeBron playing at the level that he played at last year, the Lakers can make a push in the West.
Easy.
It's tough for me, man. Unless there's another pandemic and the NBA shuts down for 5 months again, to give LeBron a chance to rest his bones and to give AD a chance to recharge, I don't see it.
But don't you think the last 5 months of them not being in the playoffs and not playing basketball since April has helped them recharge?
It has. I mean, right? Listen, if the playoffs began today, they'll be good. The thing is, there's like 6 months of basketball to go between now and when the playoffs begin.
That's right.
And I think for me, like I said, LeBron can't be. It's unfair to ask him to be the most fundamental piece at age 38. It's unfair. So I think the fact that they're relying on Anthony Davis, if they're relying on like a Giannis or a Jokic or even an Embiid, or just then I'll have more faith. But the fact that they're relying on a guy who's shown you throughout his career that he can't be the guy that takes you. Even when he was in New Orleans, he never got past the first round. He's shown you like he's not the guy that's going to be able to take you there as the fundamental piece. And LeBron at 38, I think is unfair. And I think if this was LeBron at 28, yeah, then the Lakers are coming out the West. But even at 34 or 33, I think they're probably going to at least make the finals. But he's at 38 now. And I think last year was phenomenal on offense, but he's a year older. And who knows how his body will react to being in year 21. So I'm certain to even say it out loud. But like, we'll see. But I wouldn't put money on it.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned, unless there was another pandemic, but a player in Kawhi Leonard who's had all sorts of injury problems, he had the same pandemic, and yet he blew a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets. And this is a Clippers team who's not too different from how they're currently constructed, who you've just had as potential favorites to make it in the West. So I don't know. And then obviously with the LeBron point, you said like LeBron is a year older. I'm sure going into last season, before he averaged 30, people also said, he's going to be a year older. His scoring is probably going to decrease. So I don't know. I wouldn't write LeBron off. I think LeBron has kind of proven that it wouldn't be the smartest thing to write him off.
That's fair enough. I mean, his scoring definitely, that's it, nothing to say about it. He averaged 30 points at age, 37. That's very impressive. But I think if you look at his defensive win shares, they really came down massively last year. I think at one point, I think his defensive win shares are 125 or 130, somewhere around there. And the year before, he'd been top 10. So I think maybe we can say the fact that AD was really healthy. He was playing a different type of team with Carmelo Anthony and people like that who weren't playing defense collectively. So maybe that affected him. But I think his defense, took a step back last year because he had to carry more load on offense, I guess. But yeah, and as for Kawhi Leonard, fair enough. That year they did blow a 3-1 lead to the Nuggets. But I will say that his supporting cast has become better because they've had to play without him. And the fact that they were able to knock out the Utah Jazz without him, was it last year? When he went down injured and the Jazz had a lead effectively. And the Clippers walked them down and knocked them out. And then I think they took the next team 6 games of just PG. And so I think the supporting cast has improved without him. And I think Kawhi's kind of shown in Toronto, as a Spurs fan, it hurts me to say because what he did in Toronto was legendary. He basically took a team all the way. He said, get on my back. And they said, let's go. And AD's never done that before. So Kawhi, I think when he's on, like his level is much higher than Anthony Davis because he's shown that he can be the main guy, undoubtedly, and that he can take you there.
Okay, so on Kawhi, I'd like to counter that point, Beezy. I agree with you that he's shown that he's on a different level. But I think Kawhi is an enhancer as opposed to a driver. And what I mean by that is you plug Kawhi into an already established culture, such as the San Antonio Spurs, such as the Toronto Raptors, that have a culture of
defense, a culture of passing, a culture of winning. They had leaders in Lowry and others. They had a very solid structure, and what they were missing was a player that could just get them a bucket or get them a stop at the end of the game. So when they got Kawhi, he came in, he did that job amazingly 1 year and left. That's perfect. He's a mercenary. That's what he's good at. They brought him into the Clippers to establish a culture there, establish a culture of leadership, a culture of winning, a culture of consistency. And in the first year he got there, he annoyed, well, not he, but his entourage or whoever was around him managed to annoy the existing Clippers who performed really well the year before, the likes of Montrezl Harrell, the likes of Pat Bev, the likes of Lou Will. So from a establishing of a culture and driving leadership and winning and carrying a team, I'd argue that Kawhi's not really proved that he can actually carry a team with the culture and the whole team behind him. He's proved that he can be dropped into a perfect scenario and perform well. Very similar to Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, throughout his entire career, has never been able to lead a team to the finals. But if you put him on an already existing team, well, you saw what they did. So I think AD, KD, Kawhi are all cut from the same cloth. Very talented, uber athletic, really good on both ends of the floor. But they're not people that can actually take you to the promised land as the leader, like a Curry or a Giannis. And it remains to be seen whoever else can do that in the league. That's why I think for the Clippers, they actually perform better in adversity when they don't have their stars. Kawhi, as a main guy, hasn't taken them very far at all in the years he's been there. So I'd argue that as talented as he is, as good as he is two-way, he's not going to drive you, and he's very injury prone. And typically speaking, PG is another guy. Same again. He's not a player for me that can carry you. He's demonstrated issues of mentality and said it himself. He suffers from mental health issues, which are not things to be trifled with, but demonstrate to me that you've got two players there that are clearly not leaders, two players there that are clearly not tone setters. That would concern me, talent aside, personally.
Yeah, I mean, can I just add one point?
Yeah, of course,
It's a bit unfair on Kevin Durant. He did take the Thunder to the finals. So when you said he can't take a team to the finals, he has technically.
No, I didn't say he couldn't take a team to the finals. I'm saying a player can't lead you to the promised land. With all due respect, Kevin Durant got to the finals with a very, very solid team around him, and I would argue that Westbrook actually was the driving force. He wasn't the most talented player, but he set the tone for the OKC team. At that time in their careers, Kevin Durant was easily the better player, but Westbrook was the leader of that team. And that's why they had their problems. That's why they had their issues. Harden came in to carry the ball towards the fourth quarter, and he would drive the fourth quarters. But for the first 3 quarters, it was Westbrook. For me personally, Durant, uber talented, not a person that's going to carry your team. And that's evidenced by his lack of ability to drive a team to the finals and beyond without having a team like Curry and the Warriors around him. And look, I'm not saying Westbrook was the best player on the Thunder. I'm never going to say that. I've seen him perform. I've seen him play. But I'm saying in terms of leadership, for wrong or for right, there's no arguing that Westbrook sets a tone. It might not be the tone that you need, but he sets the tone. Durant doesn't set the tone. Durant is the kind of person that fits into a great system, but does not set the tone. And that's what defines great players. That it's all well and good being talented, but you need to be able to get people behind you and they need to follow you. Tell me a time when Durant's ever got people behind him and made him follow him to the promised land. Have you seen it? He's been in the league 14 years. Carried them. I'm not talking like I score 40 points and that's it. I'm talking you can see clearly he is saying, we're not going to lose. Get on my back. I'm going to take you. Like a Kobe.
I mean, that was 2012, right? When they went to the finals? Was it 2012 or 2011?
It was 2012.
2012, yeah. Was that not the year he won the MVP? Was that the year before?
I'm not sure if it was that year.
He won the MVP in 2014.
2014, yeah. But I think he led the league in scoring. Was it 2-3 years in a row before that?
Yeah, he's a great scorer. He's a great talent.
I think to say, because I mean, when you look at what happened to the team after he left, so Russell Westbrook was the main driver, and then KD leaves and they don't win the playoff series after he goes, and Westbrook was still in his prime, and they put in they brought in PG, that Carmelo Anthony there. So they brought in other guys who could play alongside him, and Russell Westbrook couldn't really
To be
take him.
fair, it's when Harden left that you found the real decline, because KD was with Russ for a year or two before after Harden left, and they didn't. And injuries stopped them from achieving what they wanted to achieve. But what I'm saying is, they had the perfect storm, right? They had Durant, they had Harden, they had Ibaka, they had Westbrook, all performing at a high level. But Westbrook was the he was the driving force in terms of the emotive leader of that team. Harden,
at that point, maybe emotionally, he might have been.
Yeah, he was the driver. And again, I don't think you can win a championship in 2022 with a player like Westbrook. I'm not suggesting that, but Westbrook has the mentality of a person who can drive you to a championship. He just doesn't have the skill set and doesn't have the humility to work on his game to improve in the way that he needs to improve. And I've seen it time and time again with talented players that are not able to have it mentally, and that's fine. When it's their time to shine, you can see what they can do. Pippen, another one. Look, we're going back, 30 years, but Jordan left. Pippen carried the team to 55 wins. But when it came down to the crunch and Jackson gave Kukoc the ball to shoot, Pippen had a little bit of a strop, sat on the bench and didn't want to shoot, didn't want to come on, didn't want to play. That demonstrates to you where that guy's head is at. That demonstrates to you that some people are better to be uber talented, but not the main person that's going to drive the culture of the team. And I just think Durant, AD, and those other guys I've mentioned are players that don't have it. The players that I've seen who have it, LeBron, Curry, and Giannis. It remains to be seen whether the likes of Embiid or Jokic or others have that same tenacity, but we haven't seen it yet. And it's not an easy thing to have.
True. Just to carry your point, just to one quick thing. You said after Harden left, the team never really got going in terms of once he left to go to Houston. And the year before, KD left to join the Warriors. They were in the West Finals. They had a 3-1 lead. So they were basically one game from the NBA Finals, and then it all went to pot. So they did have a decent run after Harden left. They were one game from the NBA Finals.
No. What I was saying was that they had some bad luck with injuries, right? So Harden left. They had some bad luck with, I think, Durant injured his foot.
Ibaka
Westbrook injured his knee. Ibaka had his injuries. So I'm saying the reason why they didn't perform well was bad luck. But what I'm really getting at is their success, talent-wise, mainly due to Durant. In terms of leadership, I would argue that Westbrook was the driving force. And let's be real, if you're the leader of the team you don't leave that team. You get rid of Westbrook. That's your team. That's your city. That's everyone felt like when does a leader ever leave? Leaders don't leave. Leaders kick you out. If you're setting the tone, it will be uncomfortable for someone else to make you leave. People will be questioning what's going on. Why is he going? He's meant to be the person that's still here. So I get it. Look, leadership's an intangible, but again, I'm watching the game and I'm looking at it. I'm saying what you see in AD is what I see in Kawhi, is what I see in KD at different levels. The difference is Kawhi went to a circumstance which was perfect for him in terms of the Spurs, went to a circumstance which was perfect in terms of the Raptors, and KD went to a circumstance in the Warriors that was perfect. AD went to a circumstance with LeBron that was perfect. In the bubble, no fans. He shoots, 35-40% from free or some madness like that. We know that's never going to happen again. But ideal circumstances with a level of talent like that, and you can achieve great things. But you can't carry it. And I know I've been going on and on and on about it, but I just feel like leadership is such an underrated part of greatness.
No, it is.
About
it is.
NBA players and setting the tone, which is why when we have the conversation about Durant and Curry last week, I had a thought about it and I was like, Durant's definitely the better talent. But when you guys were telling me about the intangibles, I was like, absolutely, Stephen Curry is the player you'd want to have because he sets the tone. He might not be a Draymond and set the tone verbally, but he sets the tone through his execution and through the way he handles himself, the way he's consistent. You can set your watch to how that guy is going to be. You know for a fact he's not going to have too many flare-ups. He's not going to cause too many problems. He's going to do what he needs to do to make sure that the team wins. And then when it comes down to it, there's times where you look in the games and you're like, Curry will put them on his back and carry them. And I haven't seen Durant do that in adversity. I've seen him do it when they're winning. I've seen him do it when they're killing it. But when they're down 2-1, down 3-1, I've not seen him come back and show anything that demonstrates he's got that leadership. But I'm done with my rant now. I'll step back and forward. Be easy.
No, I hear you, Jermaine.
We'll see Kawhi and KD this year, hopefully, if they're healthy, and we'll actually get an opportunity to see whether or not they have that leadership quality and they can actually carry a team. They might be able to be wrong.
I mean, we'll find out. I mean, KD was one size 14 sneaker from knocking out Giannis, so we'll find out this season. Hopefully he's wearing a smaller size now. We'll find out.
Hey, look, I don't, if those guys ever get to watch any of these shows in the future, which I doubt, but if they ever did, look, those guys, utmost respect, man. KD's one of my favorite players of all time. I'm just saying, you got to know who is your CEO and who your COO is. You got to know where to put them. And I don't think he's a CEO, bro. I think he's a COO. Get stuff done, but he ain't the leader.
Fair enough.
Cool. Guys, again, I think I spoke a bit too long there, so maybe we can edit that bit out in the part where my camera cut out. Matt, Deezy, I'd like to thank you both for the show today. I expected it to be a 20-minute one, and somehow we ended up doing it an hour again. Maybe we just like each other's company, or we're just full of analogies that upset each other. Who knows? Anyway, have a great day. Guys, for tuning in, thank you very much for your time, effort, and energy. And Olu, thanks for setting this up. Take care.
See you guys next week.
Next week.